Good morning. There we go. It's great to be with you this morning. Okay. This morning we'll be in Matthew chapter 22, verses 1 through 14. Matthew 22, 1 through 14. So this is a parable of the wedding feast. So what we'll do this morning is we'll get some context behind the parable, then we'll go through the parable, and then we'll draw conclusions. So at first, we'll read the parable. So starting verse 1, And again, Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son, and sent his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding feast, but they would not come. Again, he sent other servants, saying, 'Tell those who are invited, see, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast.' But they paid no attention and went off, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his servants, treated them shamefully, and killed them. The king was angry and sent his troops and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, 'The wedding feast is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore to the main roads and invite to the wedding feast as many as you find.' And those servants went out into the roads and gathered all who they found, both bad and good. So the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to look at the guests, he saw there a man who had no wedding garment. And he said to him, 'Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment?' And he was speechless. Then the king said to the attendants, 'Bind him hand and foot and cast him into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, for many are called, but few are chosen.'" So, some context behind the parable. First, we have the Jewish marriage customs. So, the parents get together and they arrange the union between their children. So then there's a betrothal, and the preparatory invitations are sent out to the wedding. Now, the betrothal is a lot more serious than what we think of engagements today. If a man died when he was betrothed, the woman would be considered a widow. We look at Matthew chapter 1, verses 18 and 19. Now the birth of Jesus took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. Her husband Joseph, being a just man and unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly. So Joseph resolves to divorce her, but doesn't just let her go. So it's not just we're done by. It's a serious thing, and it's a lot more complicated. So, and also it would have been a lot more public than it is today. So as we can see, it's a lot more serious than just walking away. So these invitations were sent out up to a year before the wedding so that people would have time to make plans for it. And finally, when it was time for the wedding feast, the groom would send out a crier to warn of his coming and that the wedding is about to begin. So next we have a series of 3 parables in which this is the last one from chapter 21, verse 28 to 22, verse 14, that are of Jesus trying to get the Jews to realize that it was necessary to see the kingdom, but they were too stubborn to see it. So a brief synopsis of the other 2 parables. The first is the parable of the 2 sons. So in this parable, a man sends his 2 sons to go work, and one says, "I will go," and didn't go, and the other said, "I won't," but eventually did. So basically the meaning behind this parable is the one who said he would go is the Jews. They had the right, but then they blew it. And then the other son is the Gentile sinners. They didn't have the acceptance, but then they took advantage of it. And then the next parable is the parable of the tenants. So a man rented out his vineyard to some tenants, expecting them to give him his part, but they don't, and end up killing one of his servants and his son. So he has them killed and gives the vineyard to someone who will take care of it. So the Jews are the first group of tenants that had the vineyard in their hand, but they lost it, and they murdered their opportunity for the kingdom. And then when you go through chapter 2 and then you get into chapter 23, this whole chapter is Jesus telling the scribes that they're trying to look appreciative of the gift that they have received, but they're really not. They're just a bunch of hypocrites. So now we get into the parable. So starting with verses 1 and 2, it says, "And again Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. And he sent a that's it. Okay. So we see that the wedding feast is imagery of the kingdom of heaven. So then verses 3 and 4, "And he sent his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding feast, but they would not come. And again he sent other servants, saying, Tell those who are invited, See, I have prepared my dinner, my oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast." So here we have the fulfillment of the invitation. As we talked about earlier, they would have had the king calls for the wedding feast, which they would have had plenty of time to prepare for, yet they didn't. The king made all of this preparation for this feast, but the people who were supposed to be there didn't come. And if we think about it, if we think of the Jews at the time of Jesus, they have hundreds of prophecies pointing to the Messiah, yet they can't see that it is Jesus because of their false perception of who the Messiah was supposed to be, and also stubbornness to abandon what they've always known. We look at verses 5 through 7. "But they paid no attention and went off, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his servants, treated them shamefully, and killed them. The king was angry and sent his troops and destroyed those murderers and burned their city." They made all kinds of excuses as to why they couldn't make it. They had what they thought were more important things than coming to the king's feast, and to the point of murder to avoid going to the feast. And as we see, it resulted in them dying for it. So can you imagine? It was incredibly disrespectful to ignore a wedding invitation from a normal person, but to the king when you had plenty of time to prepare. If we think about it from the Jewish perspective, the ones who didn't follow Jesus were more happy to make excuses to not see the truth and even prevent others from seeing the truth. There are examples of the Pharisees in the Gospels having Jesus into their house to eat, but as soon as he's eating with someone they don't deem as righteous, they're like, "Whoa, this man eats with tax collectors and sinners." Look at John chapter 9. We have the story of Jesus healing a blind man. If we look specifically at verses 18 through 23, it says, The Jews did not believe that he had been born blind and received his sight, until they called the parents of the man who received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son, and he was born blind. But how he now sees, we do not know, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he is of age. He will speak for himself." I want y'all to notice specifically at verse 22. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. Then his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." So the parents obviously witnessed a miracle, yet they were so scared of what they were comfortable with, they were too scared to see the truth and lose what they were comfortable with. Because the Pharisees were too stubborn to see the truth, they were keeping others from seeing the truth. Just like the servants in the parable, some of the Jews were so scared of losing their comfort zone that they killed the one who came to bring them to the kingdom. If we think about modern context, are there ever things that draw us away from either the kingdom as a whole or just to the point where we become stagnant? Maybe it could be like the servants, and it's our farm or our business. Maybe it's family, hobbies, social media. Do we ever ignore the people who try to help us grow in our faith or cut them off completely? Hopefully, we don't go as far as the servants and Jews did and kill them. In verses 8 through 10, it says, Then he said to his servants, The wedding feast is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy. Go therefore to the main roads and invite to the wedding feast as many as you can find. And those servants went out into the roads and gathered all whom they found, both bad and good. So the wedding hall was filled with guests. So we see that the servants didn't discriminate about who they brought in. They brought in everybody. As we have established in this parable, the Jews are the ones who didn't take advantage of the invitation. If we think about what we know about the people who are outside of the Jews in the Bible, they didn't think of them very highly. So you can imagine what's going on in the listeners' heads. I think it's interesting to think about the fact that it specifically points out the good and the bad. So it wasn't just that they brought in the people who would have been, so to say, next in line after the king's social class, but they brought in everybody. In today's world, I don't think it would take long to think of groups of people that wouldn't be caught dead diligently seeking to bring to the wedding feast because it's out of our comfort zone to deal with them. But they're the ones who are receptive. When I think back to mission trips or door knocking campaigns I've done in the past, it's always the poor who couldn't even afford food sharing what little they do have when it's not reciprocated by those who actually do have. Or the ones who actually show up from the door knocking, but all the comfortable ones shut the door in your face, if they even answer at all. One of my elder friends down in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, him and I were talking about prison ministry, and he was talking about how the inmates are receptive because they lost all their hope. And, we always think about how Jeffrey Dahmer became a Christian, but he studied with another serial killer, the Louisiana Strangler, and he also became a Christian. If we think about the tax collectors and sinners that the Pharisees were saying Jesus ate with, they were the social outcasts of Jesus' day. And the religious folk didn't want anything to do with them, but they were receptive. So in verses 11 through 14 it says, But when the king came in to look at the guest, he saw that there was a man who had no wedding garment. And he said to him, Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment? And he was speechless. Then the king said to the attendants, Bind him hand and foot and cast him into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, for many are called, but few are chosen. So I guess there's two schools of thought on this. The guy who wrote the book that Michael gave us said that the man did not come to the wedding prepared, but I've always been taught and heard that they would have provided a garment. But the king would have provided a garment to them when they arrived. Either way, the man didn't take full advantage of the opportunity that he was given and did not receive the ability to participate in the wedding feast. So we can see that he had the opportunity and he still didn't take it, even though he made it to the wedding feast. So in conclusion, we have been provided, like the Jews, an opportunity to take advantage of the invitation that we have been given and become a part of the kingdom or the wedding feast. Unlike the Jews, we need to take advantage of the invitation and not let other things lead our desires in other directions. We need to be receptive to bringing in everybody, the good and the bad, not just the ones who fit our idea of socially acceptable. And finally, we need to make sure we're fully prepared for the feast so that we will make it into the feast or the kingdom.